Good evening and welcome to Inside Government, a show produced for the spring 22 semester here at Cayuga Community College and broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon, Fios, as well as ARMA, the Auburn Regional Media Access, as well as Win 89.1, the college's radio station. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. We are delighted to have back in our studio tonight Cayuga County Health Educator DEANNA HOEY to talk about the county's efforts to fight lead, a serious health hazard here in our community. A recent Kiplinger newsletter reported that lead still is a major impact across the nation. It impacts brain and nervous systems and might be linked to even to violent crime. The recently passed infrastructure bill from Congress put $15 million in to replace lead pipes. We're going to talk about paint, though, but it tells you where it is as a priority. But that will only cover about 1/4 of the cost overall in the nation. And even the President mentioned lead on Tuesday night in his State of the Union. So we've asked Ms. Ryan on to talk about what is being done locally, not only to where lead is and its effects, especially on children, but what steps are being taken to find remedies for the health impacts. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
So you've been on since, but I looked, the last time we talked about lead was in 2016, so it's been almost 5 years since we talked about this. So, you know, some basics, where we are, how big a problem is lead in our community?
So lead certainly has become more of a problem because the intervention level has been reduced by the New York State Department of Health. So our intervention level to intervene now with children is 5 micrograms per deciliter, whereas before it was 10 or 15.
So why did they reduce it?
Because they're finding that really no levels of lead are good for a child to have, and just recently the CDC lowered their threshold to intervene to 3.5.
So it means more cases versus less cases.
Right. It's more cases. We're trying to intervene at lower levels to really reduce the impacts and the health effects of lead poisoning in our community.
So is this a, you know, I know we're not talking about lead pipes, but for you, is it just, are you working on the paint portion, or is the county, we'll talk maybe a little bit about pipes at the end, but obviously that number stuck out to me of $15 billion because that's a lot of money. Are there concerns about pipes in Cayuga County, but are you mainly focused on paint right now?
So, we're more concerned about the paint because that's where our environmental assessments really find the source of the poisoning to happen locally, and it's due to the older housing stock. We're certainly concerned about the lead pipes, but majority of the lead poisonings that we're seeing are coming from deteriorating paint.
And is it mainly a city issue? Is it a county issue? Is it, when I say county, rural areas, or is it all over the place?
No, lead poisoning is dispersed throughout the county. Certainly there's more cases in the city because that's where we're more densely populated.
About 10,000 properties.
Yeah, there's a lot of properties.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, we are, you know, conscious that there's a lot of people in the city and there's more access to health care. So we're thinking that maybe more kids are being tested in the city and they have access. But certainly rural parts of the community, north and south, are impacted by lead.
And so I think the benchmark when I was looking at my notes is it's houses and apartments and multiple units that were painted or built before 1978. Is correct. Usually where you have lead, correct?
Yes. And when lead paint's intact, it's really not a problem. But when it's peeling, chipping, flaking, it hasn't been maintained, sometimes when there's water issues in the home, it deteriorates that way, or friction surfaces like opening and closing doors and windows. That's typically where dust can be created as well.
So it's both interior and it can be exterior as well with exposure to light on paint surfaces as well, correct?
So yeah, there's issues mostly inside of the home because that's where a child spends most of their time, but if someone's renovating a home exterior-wise and interior-wise, they can get on clothes, your hands, things like that, toys, and you can bring it inside.
So when I was growing up in the 1970s, there were a lot of ads about lead paint and its impact and whatnot. So we're about 40 years later. How come we haven't made more headway?
It's a good question. I don't know. Certainly the housing stock, the quality of our housing stock has declined, and we're really focused on a lot of initiatives that are going to help homeowners and landlords raise awareness of lead. And, you know, fixing, peeling, flaking paint isn't really is inexpensive. You know, you just go buy a bucket of paint and paint it, and we think it's simple. But sometimes windows and doors need to be replaced, and that becomes more costly. So we're really focused on the term we call primary prevention, preventing kids from being poisoned completely before the poisoning happens.
So when did the state change their from 10 to 5?
Probably around 2019, I think.
Okay, so you've had at least a year or two in between. So on a given year, how many cases do you have at the county?
Yeah, so right now, currently, as of yesterday, our caseload is about 67 kids. Prior to this reference level changing and our intervention level changing, we were around 46. So
how do you identify, how are referrals made to you?
Yeah.
How do you find these 67?
So New York State recommends that children are tested at 1 and 2. So most often pediatricians and family care providers are testing children.
Okay, so let's stop there for a second. So suggested they get tested at 1 and 2.
It might be required, actually.
Okay, so I was going to ask, because I know
Yeah.
you have a 5-year-old and close to 5-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
You leave the hospital, you have to have hearing and sight and all those things checked, and I know every year when you go to the doctor, or at least every other year, they check a child's sight and they do hearing, but do they test for lead on a regular basis?
Yeah, they should be. And most of our healthcare providers in our community have a machine called Lead Care 2. So it's a screening tool where it's a finger prick. So it's a little less invasive. And if that level comes back elevated over 5, then we usually refer people on for the more invasive, like venous draw, to get a more accurate picture of what's going on.
So when that machine is used, is that only used when there are symptoms of lead, or is it used for every single child who goes to a pediatrician?
It should be used at well checks, regardless of symptoms, up through actually age 6, but I think the requirement is children at 1 and 2 should be tested, and then they should be assessed and screened up to age 6.
And what happens if a child is not, what happens if you go to a physician who doesn't have this machine?
Then the physician can write a script for a laboratory, and the child can go and have the venous draw there, or we're getting back up into going out and offering lead testing certain places in the community, and then offering lead testing through our clinics as well, as we come out of COVID.
As you come out of COVID, okay.
Yes, we're rebuilding
Well,
some of our
because
buildings.
part of this, I was trying to stay away from COVID today, but for you, the next guest is going to get a lot of COVID questions, but for what you're doing on this basis, how has COVID impacted overall when it comes to testing, and then what remediation steps you take?
Yeah, so, with COVID and the pandemic, we saw a lot less people going and seeking the preventative care. So children were probably not getting as tested as regularly as they should be. And hopefully now that's all changing. And then certainly when we did have to intervene, families were cautious to let, people into their homes. But
It
it was
became more
still,
difficult to do remediation projects, as I understand it.
yes, it did.
I should say, as another disclosure, you have an advisory board, and I am married to somebody who sits on your advisory board.
Yes.
So I should say that that's not why you're here, but Kathleen Cuddy really wanted to push, and I know you've done banners downtown trying to raise this. I know we're kind of skipping all over the place, but what are the side effects of lead?
So the side effects of lead usually don't show up unless someone's severely poisoned, a child severely poisoned, but a small amount of lead in a child can cause significant impacts on their ability to learn, to grow, their development, and on the prolonged exposure, and then how quickly we intervene.
So
as
it does
well.
impact the nervous system in the brain. And, I mentioned this article that was in Kiplinger, and they said there's some links, and I don't know what they are, but are there links to violent crime?
So there have been studies. One study showed that a child who's poisoned was 7 times more likely to drop out of high school, 6 more times likely to end up in the juvenile justice system. So that was a study of a child. It was the slow poisoning of Freddie Gray. I believe he was in Baltimore, Maryland. A study on his particular case in children in Baltimore.
So, we talked about whether it's mandated or not. I know the county runs the WIC program. Do you test there too?
Yeah, so we're going to be partnering again to offer testing there. WIC is a great referral source to a lot of different community programs, including the programs and services we offer. So a lot of times they were referring clients to us for a test at our office, and we're looking to actually go there and meet the clients where they're at to offer the testing.
And, we've talked about children. I'm assuming, and correct, parents exposed as well to lead, there are side effects for them as well, are there not?
There are. Children typically tend to be the ones that are poisoned more often than adults, and part of the reason is because they absorb the lead more quickly into their body. They also spend a lot of time on the floor playing.
I was just say, sometimes if you have a child who's playing on the floor, there's a tendency for the children to put toys in their mouth, and if there's lead in the air and particles that...
Correct.
I'm assuming most parents are not doing.
Some parents will play on the ground and things like that, but a lot of times, parents can be exposed through hobbies and different things. But when we go out and we do an assessment, we talk to the parents. Sometimes we've encountered a pregnant mom who has a lead-poisoned child and didn't know that lead could be a problem for her and her unborn child. So we're focused on also educating women about the importance of.
So how is a woman tested? Is that during the normal obstetrics process?
I think they're supposed to be assessed, and then they can be tested.
And the active cases you have now, are they all children?
They're all children.
Okay, so they're...
Yeah, our program focuses on children, and then a different division of the State Health Department focuses on adult poisonings.
Generalization. Would most houses prior to 1978 have some type of lead paint in them? And should people get them checked? I guess that's a two-part.
Yeah, I think that there certainly is risk of a home having lead-based paint if it was built before 1978. But if there's multiple layers of the paint and the paint's in is important, but I don't think that people need to go out and test their homes right away. I think they need to be mindful of the signs of what to look for, the peeling, chipping, flaking paint, and things.
So we'll get to testing of the home in a second. So what happens when you find Johnny Jones or Sally Smith, and they are a child and they have higher than the 5? Mm-hmm. What's the process then? Walk us through.
Yeah, so a child goes to the healthcare provider and gets tested. The healthcare provider, the laboratory, sends the test result to us, similar with a lot of other lab results that get reported to us. And then we take it to where we do care coordination. We're calling the healthcare provider to see what's going on. We're calling the family to, provide education and materials to them. And then we're also making a referral right in our office to our environmental staff. And those staff will go out and try to identify the source of the poisoning.
Does that mean I had a friend who 15 years ago had on the west end of the city of Auburn, his children all were identified with lead, and they moved out for a while, and they took care of the problem themselves. I don't think they involved the county at that time. But do you ask that children be removed and families be removed from structures that have lead, or not until you have identified it through the environmental group?
So our environmental team, will go in and do the assessment, and oftentimes families can stay where they're at. They don't need to leave for the work to be performed. Every situation, some prefer to leave, some need to leave, depending on the extent.
Can you force somebody to leave?
I don't think we can force someone. We can certainly take action if the work isn't being done to make sure that it's corrected.
Because they're endangering the welfare of a child.
Yeah, like we have an ability to issue a notice of demand and require them to complete the work that's identified in like a work plan by our inspectors. And then if they don't, then they get summons to a Board of Health hearing.
So what happens to the home where the remediation? So this could be anything from a small project to a large project, correct?
It could be like one windowsill in a child's bedroom that the child, sleeps near, and the windows are open in summer and the dust is poisoning the child. And it could be something as simple as that, or it could be something more extensive.
So in the case of my friend, his was a rental, but they still moved out and they took care of it. I guess they had the cooperation of the landlord, and they had a larger family. What's the cost of something like that?
So it depends. Obviously, when you're talking abatement, the abatement, gets more expensive. There's certified contractors that need to be used to perform certain scope of work, one being like windows and door replacements. But
It's not as intense as, say, asbestos abatement.
I don't really know the extent of the cost of what it costs. I've seen, some scopes of work cost tens of thousands of dollars, and I've seen other projects where a homeowner can, do the work themselves and not require a contractor.
So I know the county has kind of regrouped in the last 5 years. You've formed a advisory committee we mentioned a little bit ago. So first of all, what is the committee?
So the committee is called the Lead Task Force. We established that as a way to take our existing programming that we were doing and expand upon it. We knew we could do more. We just needed some, key stakeholders at the table to help guide us. And so we established the Lead Task Force as a way to convene key stakeholders and try to identify processes and policies and different protocols that we all could be working on. Partners, housing agencies like Cayuga County Home Site participates.
Okay. So, and their goal is to help set policy or come up with ideas?
Yeah.
And from there, what?
So we brainstorm, we talk about educational campaigns that we can do. We talk about how we can enhance our work together, with DSS. When we place people out in, an apartment or whatnot, we talk about, what to look for, signs of lead. We talk about internal policies within our own agencies that can be enhanced so that we can kind of do more of the primary prevention side. And that's really what the Lead Task Force is to focus on preventing poisoning from happening.
And so to take care of many of these issues, it costs money. And so, am I correct on this? This is not, a bucket of paint is usually the cheapest means, but it's usually not the only means that it has to be done, correct? So, does the county receive any state or federal money to help do remediation, and how do you distribute it?
Yes, so the health department has not received money for remediation. We've certainly explored opportunities with our Lead Task Force to apply for funds, but the good news is that the city has funds through their CDBG monies. Home Site has a lot of opportunities for home repair and renovation, and then just recently, Home Headquarters and Home Site awarded HUD money to focus on healthy housing that targets lead and radon.
So is there an income eligibility for this money that you...
I don't know. We're getting off the ground with that. And what we do is when we identify a family that's in need of, some abatement work or some remediation or some funding to assist, we refer to Home Site because they tend to be a great resource. They know the income guidelines, they know the requirements of what, and they know all the funding sources. So they tend to leverage opportunities for families.
I know when you were here a couple of years ago, radon was a or the symptoms of radon poisoning for someone? I know we're getting off. Well, but how does somebody avail themselves of these kits, I guess is my question.
Yeah, so the health department has kits, and then we partner with lots of libraries and town and village offices to disperse them. We usually promote the fact that they're available in November, and then they're available until they run out.
And dealing with radon is different, but there are simpler fixes for that than, let's say, for lead paint, correct?
Yeah, I think the remediation for radon and the abatement for lead, it all can be costly to homeowners. I certainly think if we can prevent a lot of this from happening, it's a cheaper solution than letting our houses continue to deteriorate to the point where we have to take larger measures.
So I know about the Home Site and Home Headquarters money because my wife has a
we refer everyone there to kind of have them be the point of entry for getting.
So $100,000, how long will that last?
It depends. It certainly depends. When you're talking about replacing windows and doors, that becomes more costly. When you're talking about, fixing, peeling, chipping, flaking paint, removing carpet, things like that, it's a little less expensive.
And so have you started to do projects? Are there, I know there's CDBG money, which is the City of Auburn money, the Community Development Block Grant money. Have you started to do specific projects? Have you picked a home? Have you picked homes to do a project?
Yeah, so before we were given this HUD award, we wrote to the Emerson Foundation with home site support, and we tried to do window and door replacements as a pilot project. And so some of that money was used for a particular...
So you did get Emerson money. How much was that?
We did. We got $100,000
And
right before the pandemic hit.
And so how many properties, have you had a number of properties, or have you still got that money still?
I think they're still working their way through it, but we definitely immersed some money into one property, and they were able to leverage other funding as well. Because certain funding sources allow you to replace lead, but there might be a roof that needs to be replaced, because if there's a leaky roof, then that will deteriorate the interior paint. So they leverage their money for each property.
So in the case of Emerson, there might be some local match in regards to that. Is there a local match for the CDBG and the HUD money, or is that?
I can't speak to that because I don't manage those funding sources, but I do think that there is a match requirement. Sometimes the homeowner is expected to come up with some money, and sometimes it's income-based as well.
So those I don't want to pick on those 67 children in the sense of, are they 67 different properties, or are there multiple children at multiple properties? How do you identify properties?
Yeah, so a child that gets poisoned could have a sibling that might be a little bit older and hasn't been tested, so we would recommend that child be tested as well. And I believe it's 67 different children. When we do care coordination, we're focused on the child, not by the unit.
Okay.
But a unit is based, for our environmental side, is anywhere a child spends more than 8 hours a day. So if they go to an in-home based daycare, then we're inspecting that property as well. Or if they go to Grandma and Grandpa's house for care, we go there.
Because I think one of the comments through the federal legislation on the pipes was for not only homes but schools and care facilities, because I know that's pipes, but it covers, you can't just think it's only at a home, the person's residence. It could be at their school, though we hope it's not there. I think that's more the pipes issue, but a care facility where a child's spending 10 hours a day while mom or dad works.
Correct. It could be, poisoning could happen from a little toy that's passed down, from generation to generation. It could have lead paint on it. It could be from something that's been but
it's not just lead soldiers. We've had this conversation in our house. It's not lead soldiers, so that's an issue, but it can be a lot of different toys.
It could be, yes.
And so is the county working on just houses or residences, or are you dealing with daycare centers which might have an issue as well?
We will go wherever a child spends more than 8 hours a day. When we're involved with a poisoned child, that's the threshold. It's more than 8 hours a day.
Okay, but have you identified in some cases?
I don't know if we've gone into actual daycare centers. I think homes that are used for daycare, or a relative's home that they spend a lot of time at.
So for somebody looking around their home right now, what are the visual signs?
Well, certainly the peeling, chipping, flaking paint. It kind of looks scaly. We want people to make sure that they're looking in their windowsills and in their window troughs. If there's a lot of dust or chipping paint there, we tell people to vacuum them out or use some type of a wet wipe. Frequent cleaning of the floors, vacuuming of the floors with a HEPA filter, those things will help.
And the county goes in, I'm imagining hazmat suits, but I'm sure it's not that. I'm hoping it's not that.
No, it's not that.
How do you test when it's the county?
So we have the opportunity to use what's called an XRF machine. It's a pretty expensive machine that we take out. Our 2 staff members are lead risk assessors. They're certified to use the machine, and they can point it at a surface, and it can tell you if that surface or that item contains any lead-based paint.
And how much does a test like that cost?
So there is no cost to the individual. The machine is fairly expensive. I think it's around $20,000, and we have to resource it every few years. But there is no cost to the family for that. If the child's poisoned, that's part of the assessment.
And if they go in, let's say today, how quickly do you get results?
The results for the XRF machine are pretty immediate, from my understanding. And sometimes we do dust wipe samples to see if the dust actually does contain lead, and those are sent to a laboratory, so the results have a longer turnaround time for those.
So you're in Property X in the city of Auburn, and the XRF machine.
And you're going to want to keep an eye on it to make sure it stays intact.
And when there is a remediation process, let's take this house you mentioned the Emerson funds are being used. How long has that been going on?
That was a unique project because there was some different requirements that were needed, but I think it took anywhere from 6 to 9 months to complete.
So does the homeowner stay in the property at that time?
Yeah, and the homeowner was able to do some of the work, and then obviously some of the work was extensive enough where it needed a contractor.
And so once you identify something with this machine, it can be a couple of days to fix, or I guess what I'm looking at is what happens if it's a bigger project and you mentioned the roof, or there's other issues there. How long can somebody be out of their house, and are there just as importantly, are there funds, if they've got to go someplace, they've got to pay for that too?
So our staff are really focused on keeping them where they're at and giving them the tools to stay there safely. So sometimes it's moving furniture to block a window that could be a hazard until the window can be replaced. So we might just say, move, a dresser over to this window, or move the baby out of this room and have the baby sleep in this room. So lots of times there's
because there might be some rooms that have lead and some that do not.
Right, and if the paint's intact, we're not going to, do anything with that. It's just if the paint is not intact, we're looking at those hazards.
And I want to go back to just as we finish up, the community development block grant money. So what is the city money?
So that city money, I think Homesite helps to, administer that, and they look at housing renovations, and I think lead work would be eligible for that. And
I know you have a lot on your plate right now because your boss was here 2 weeks ago. She's nice enough to, and she's the one who sent you over here today. As a funding priority for the county, where is lead when it comes to, are you funded by county tax dollars, or is it really you have to go out and seek outside sources for that? You mentioned HUD, you mentioned CDBG, you mentioned a private foundation. You need more money, I'm assuming, for this.
So it's such a dynamic problem that there's a lot of different funding sources. So we're required to do that as part of being a public health department. So then we get a small base grant every year from the New York State Department of Health. This year we were awarded extra money, which was exciting because it kind of came as a surprise, to focus on primary prevention. And we also have our Healthy Neighborhoods.
And what's primary prevention, by the way?
Primary prevention is correcting the lead hazard before a child's poisoned.
Okay.
So we're talking about a first-time mom who's pregnant. We might be able to go in and fix some of the peeling, chipping, flaking paint before. But if they seem like hyperactive or they seem like they can't hold
What kid under 3 is it?
I know, it's really hard.
As I say that to...
yes,
yes,
I know.
Okay.
So that's why the screening is really important, because a lot of these things could be missed, and we don't want the levels to get high enough and accumulate high enough where the damage is really irreversible at that time.
We want to thank DEANNA HOEY Ryan for joining us today. She's a public health educator for the county and regularly been here to give us updates on different projects that the county is working on, and we look forward to having you back. Talk about lead and where you are on that, but other initiatives of the county.
Thanks for having me.
We will return in just a moment with Beyond the Front Page featuring HEAL Project Director Monica Salvage to give us an update on the Healing Community Study and local overdose trends, something that we mentioned on Tuesday with Sheriff Schenk. We'll be back on Tuesday with new Auburn Police Chief James Sladen. He'll give us an update on his department's efforts to deal with nuisance properties, as you may have been reading in the newspaper, as well as their efforts to recruit more officers, among other topics. And next Thursday on Inside Government, we'll have Cayuga County's new Director of Veterans Services, Kevin Swab. He'll be on to discuss his office and what they're doing to assist local veterans, and that will be followed by Beyond the Front Page. Center, as well as what is the state of the arts as a result of COVID. Over the next month, we do have a number of guests. We have a fairly full slate in the next couple of weeks as we have this shortened season this year. We have New York State Senator Pamela Helming will be in here. Someone Brian McDelove will be here. Cayuga County Legislative Chairman David Gould will be back for County Update. Cayuga Community College President Brian Durant will be here. I mentioned Chief Sladen, but Stephanie Hutchinson, the Executive Director of the Auburn Housing Authority, and Melissa Cartner of the YMCA will be in here to talk about their programs. And then we will have Jeff Perizzola and Lisa Green of the Auburn Large School District to talk about their budget that will go before voters in May. We'll also be having our annual Auburn Large School District Forum on May 3rd. Before we go, though, we would like to let you know that you can send us your ideas for guests or questions that you want asked to Inside Government or Beyond the Front Page. You can send questions by email to cozguytho@aol.com or by mail to either Inside Government or Beyond the Front Page at 141 Dunning Avenue, Auburn, New York, 13021. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cayuga Community College. We want to thank you for watching tonight. Stick for a discussion on the HEAL program, and otherwise have a good night, a great tomorrow. Be safe and wear your mask.